Malik Turner wasn't new to being watched. At 14, he had already mastered the art of keeping his hands visible in convenience stores, of nodding politely to neighbors who clutched their purses tighter when he walked by. He was used to the sideways glances, the cautious stares. But nothing prepared him for the way Mr. Caldwell looked at him that afternoon. It started with a missing watch, a silver Rolex, the kind only a man like Mr. Caldwell could afford. He never missed a chance to show it off, the gleaming face catching the classroom lights as he gestured through his history lectures. "A gift from my father," he'd say, rolling up his sleeves just enough to let it flash in view. Now it was gone, and somehow that meant Malik was the first suspect. 2:47 p.m., last period. The final bell was minutes away. Malik sat at his desk near the back of the room, tapping his pencil against his notebook. The scent of old paper and dry erase markers clung to the air as students murmured in low voices, waiting for the clock to set them free. "And that is why the Civil War wasn't just about slavery," Mr. Caldwell droned from the front of the room, pacing like he was delivering the most groundbreaking revelation in history. Malik tuned him out. His mind was already on his walk home, on the shortcut he'd take through the old train tracks, the way he'd cut across Mrs. Ellis's yard even though she always yelled at him for it. He was thinking about the new beat he'd been working on, the one he was eager to record on his busted laptop. But then, "Malik, stay after class." Malik's head snapped up. He felt a few heads turn toward him, classmates exchanging glances. His stomach clenched, but he nodded. He wasn't in trouble. He hadn't done anything, right? 3:02 p.m. The accusation. The last of the students filed out, their sneakers squeaking against the linoleum. The door shut behind them, sealing Malik inside with Mr. Caldwell. The air felt different now. Malik slung his backpack over one shoulder, waiting. Mr. Caldwell leaned against his desk, arms crossed. He let the silence stretch, too long, too heavy. Then, finally, he spoke. "Do you know why I asked you to stay?" Malik shook his head. "My watch is missing." Malik blinked. "What?" "It was right here before lunch." Mr. Caldwell tapped the desk, fingers drumming against the wood. "And now it's gone." Malik felt heat crawl up his neck. "And you think I took it?" "I didn't say that," Mr. Caldwell replied smoothly. His voice was even, but his eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, told a different story. Malik's fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. "I didn't take your watch." Mr. Caldwell exhaled, shaking his head with a tired smirk. "Look, I don't want to make this into something bigger than it needs to be. Just hand it over, and we'll forget about it." Malik's breath caught in his throat. There it was, that unspoken message beneath the words. "I know you did it, and I'm giving you a chance to confess." Malik swallowed, his mind racing. He thought about his mom, about how hard she worked, about the look she'd give him if she even thought he'd stolen something. He thought about his little sister, Aaliyah, about the way she looked up to him. He thought about how no matter what he said next, it might not even matter, because Mr. Caldwell had already made up his mind. "I said I didn't take it." The teacher's smirk faded. "Then I guess we have a problem." Malik's pulse pounded in his ears. The door swung open. Mrs. Townsend, the assistant principal, stepped inside, arms folded across her chest. Her sharp gaze flickered from Mr. Caldwell to Malik. "Everything all right here?" Mr. Caldwell didn't miss a beat. "I was just talking to Malik about a missing item. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. Malik had heard that word before, when his neighbor called the cops because she thought he was lingering outside his own apartment, when the security guard at the store stopped him just to make sure he wasn't stealing. And now, when his teacher decided that the black boy in his classroom must be the one to blame. Mrs. Townsend's gaze hardened as she looked at him. Malik knew, without a doubt, that she believed Mr. Caldwell, and that this was far from over. Malik sat in the hard plastic chair outside the assistant principal's office, his fingers gripping the hem of his hoodie. The hallway was silent, except for the faint chatter of students outside, their voices muffled through the thick walls. The weight in his chest hadn't lessened. If anything, it had grown heavier. He knew how this looked. Mr. Caldwell's missing Rolex, Malik being the last one near his desk, and now, sitting outside, Mrs. Townsend's office like a suspect waiting to be judged. This wasn't the first time a teacher had looked at him differently, had assumed the worst. But this was worse than anything before. The door creaked open. "Malik, come in!" Mrs. Townsend's voice was firm, clipped. She stood by her desk, arms crossed, as if already preparing herself for whatever lie she expected him to tell. Malik stepped inside, his sneakers squeaking against the tile. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit." He obeyed. Mr. Caldwell was already in the room, sitting to the side with an expression that was both smug and concerned, a mix of righteousness and false sympathy. His sleeves were rolled up, his watchless wrist on display. Malik swallowed hard. Mrs. Townsend folded her hands. "Malik, do you know why you're here?" He let out a slow breath. "Because Mr. Caldwell lost his watch, and he thinks I took it." Mr. Caldwell frowned. "No one said you took it. We're just—" "Then why am I here?" Malik cut in. Mrs. Townsend shot him a warning glance. "Watch your tone." Malik clenched his jaw. "I understand this situation is frustrating," she continued, "but we need to be thorough. Mr. Caldwell believes his watch went missing during your class period. You were the last student near his desk before lunch." "That doesn't mean I took it," Malik said, keeping his voice even. Mrs. Townsend sighed. "Malik, do you have the watch?" A sharp silence filled the room. His fingers curled into fists. "No," he said slowly, deliberately. Another pause. Then Mr. Caldwell leaned forward. "Malik, things like this, they don't have to get out of hand. If you made a mistake, this is the time to fix it. Just give it back, and we can move forward." Malik stared at him. His heart pounded in his ears. "You think I have it?" he asked, his voice tight. Mr. Caldwell hesitated just for a second. You think I stole from you?" Malik's voice rose, his anger breaking through the calm he was trying so hard to hold on to. "Just because I was near your desk?" "Malik," Mrs. Townsend warned, "I don't have your stupid watch." His voice shook now. "I didn't touch it, but you didn't stop to think about that, did you? You just assumed." Mr. Caldwell looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his seat. "No one's assuming—" Malik let out a hollow laugh. "Yeah? So who else are you questioning?" Silence. That was all the answer he needed. Mrs. Townsend sighed again, rubbing her temple. "Malik, I think it would be best if we called your mother." His stomach dropped, not because he was guilty, but because he knew how this would look. He knew the exhaustion that would be in his mother's eyes when she arrived, the way her shoulders would tense, like she was bracing for another battle she never asked for. He knew the unspoken weight of the moment, the way black mothers always had to defend their children, not just from trouble, but from the world that expected trouble from them. And he hated it. Hated that it was happening to him. Mrs. Townsend picked up the phone, and Malik sat there, trapped beneath their gaze. 3. Malik sat in the chair, his hands balled into fists in his lap, staring at the floor. His heartbeat drummed in his ears as he listened to Mrs. Townsend's voice on the phone. "Yes, Miss Turner, we just need you to come down to the school," she said, her tone smooth, professional, like she wasn't accusing Malik of being a thief, like she wasn't pulling his mother away from her job for something he didn't do. A pause. "No, he's not in trouble. We just need to have a conversation." Another pause. "All right, see you soon." The click of the phone slamming into the receiver made Malik flinch. His eyes flickered to Mr. Caldwell. The teacher sat stiffly, arms crossed, tapping his fingers against his forearm. Still no watch on his wrist. Still no proof that Malik had anything to do with it. And yet, here he was. Waiting. A prisoner in a school office. 3:47 p.m. The arrival. The knock on the door was sharp, precise. When it swung open, Malik's mother, Denise Turner, stepped inside. She was still in her work uniform, navy scrubs, her ID badge clipped to the collar. Her dark brown eyes scanned the room quickly, landing on Malik first. She took him in, her gaze sweeping over him like she was checking for bruises, for signs of harm. Then she turned to Mrs. Townsend, her expression unreadable. "What's going on?" Mrs. Townsend gestured toward the chair next to Malik. "Please, have a seat. I'll stand." Her voice was even, but Malik knew the edge underneath it. Mrs. Townsend cleared her throat. "We have reason to believe that Malik may have been involved in the disappearance of Mr. Caldwell's watch." His mother didn't react right away. She just stared, then she blinked once, slowly. "You have reason to believe?" she repeated. Mr. Caldwell shifted in his seat. "Miss Turner, I simply noticed that Malik was the last student near my desk before the watch went missing. I wanted to handle this quietly, but—" "Did you search him?" she asked, her voice sharp. Malik stiffened. Mrs. Townsend hesitated. "No, we didn't feel that was necessary." "Did you check his locker?" Another pause. "No." "Did you check anyone else's locker?" Silence. Malik watched as his mother's lips pressed together, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head slightly. "So let me get this straight," she said, her voice eerily calm. "My son was near your desk. That's it. And instead of looking anywhere else, asking anyone else, you dragged him into this office like a criminal?" "Miss Turner," Mrs. Townsend started, but Malik's mother held up a hand. "No. You listen to me," she said. "This is how it starts. You decide he looks guilty, so you corner him. You try to make him confess to something he didn't do. Then when he refuses, because he didn't do it, you bring me in, thinking I'll force him to say what you want to hear. That's not— my son is not a thief." Her voice cracked like a whip. Malik felt something rise in his chest, something hot, tight. Mr. Caldwell had the nerve to look offended. "I'm not accusing—" "You are, and you don't even realize it." The office was dead silent. Mrs. Townsend folded her hands, her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Turner, we understand your frustration, but we have a responsibility to investigate." Denise let out a sharp laugh. "Then investigate. Go ahead. But you better investigate every other kid in that classroom the way you investigated my son." The challenge hung in the air. Mrs. Townsend and Mr. Caldwell exchanged glances, and Malik knew, right then, that they had nothing. No proof, no justification, just suspicion. 4:12 p.m. The exit, Mrs. Townsend sighed. "Malik, you're free to go." Just like that. Like they hadn't wasted an hour of his life. Like they hadn't made him feel small. Malik stood, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. His mother placed a hand on his back as they walked out of the office. Neither of them spoke until they reached the parking lot. The afternoon air was warm, thick with the scent of pavement baking in the sun. Malik swallowed hard. "Mom, you don't have to explain anything to me," she said softly. "I know." He exhaled, his body sagging with relief. But the weight in his chest? That didn't leave. Because he knew, deep down, this wouldn't be the last time. 4. The next morning, Malik walked through the school doors, feeling the weight of yesterday still pressing against his chest. The whispers had already started. Students stood in clusters by the lockers, their voices hushed but sharp, slicing through the air. Malik didn't need to hear every word to know what they were saying. "They think he stole it. Caldwell called his mom up here and everything. Did they check his bag?" Malik kept his head up, jaw tight, as he walked to his locker. He could feel their eyes on him, watching, judging, waiting. When he opened his locker, a folded note slipped out and fluttered to the floor. He frowned, bending down to grab it. 2 words, scribbled in sloppy handwriting: "Lying thief." His stomach twisted. "Hey," a voice said. He looked up to see his best friend, Jaden, standing a few lockers away. His expression was tense, his hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets. "You good?" Jaden asked. Malik exhaled through his nose, crumpling the note in his fist. "Yeah, let's just get to class." Jaden hesitated, then nodded, falling into step beside him. But before they could reach the classroom, a voice rang through the hallway. "Hey, everybody, guess what?" Malik turned just in time to see Ethan Taylor, a rich, cocky kid from the basketball team, grinning like he had just won the lottery. He waved his hand in the air and something silver gleamed between his fingers. A Rolex, Mr. Caldwell's Rolex. Gasps rippled through the hallway. Malik felt his whole body go cold. "What the hell, Ethan?" someone blurted out. Ethan just laughed, tossing the watch in the air and catching it. "Relax, man. I was just messing around. I was gonna give it back." Malik's fists clenched. Messing around. A whole day of humiliation. A whole day of Malik being treated like a criminal. His mother being dragged out of work. The whispers, the stares, the note in his locker. And Ethan? He thought it was just a joke. The crowd parted as Mr. Caldwell stormed down the hallway, his face red with anger. "Ethan, my office, now." Ethan rolled his eyes. Yeah, I got it." He tossed the watch to Caldwell, who caught it with a tight jaw. Malik waited for Mr. Caldwell to look his way, to apologize, to say something, anything, to undo the damage he had done. But he didn't. He just walked off, dragging Ethan behind him, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't spent all of yesterday making Malik feel like he was less than human, like he hadn't let the whole school believe Malik was guilty. 10:25 a.m. History class. When Malik entered Mr. Caldwell's classroom, everything felt different. Students avoided his eyes. Some looked guilty. Some just looked uncomfortable. Jaden muttered, "Man, I swear if that was me, I would have flipped this whole damn desk over." Malik just dropped into his seat, staring blankly at his notebook. Mr. Caldwell stood at the front of the room, clearing his throat. "Before we begin today's lesson," he said, adjusting his tie, "I want to address something that happened yesterday." The room was dead silent. He sighed. "I want to apologize to Malik. I shouldn't have assumed anything without evidence. That was unfair of me." Malik didn't move, didn't nod, didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't okay. And that weak apology, it wasn't enough. Mr. Caldwell shifted awkwardly, then turned back to the whiteboard, launching into another dull lecture about history. But Malik couldn't focus. His mind kept replaying everything, his mom's anger, the whispers, the way he had known from the start that he wasn't going to be given the benefit of the doubt, because guys like him never were. 4:15 p.m. The walk home after school, Malik walked home with Jaden, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "You good?" Jaden asked again. Malik kicked a loose rock on the sidewalk. "I don't know." They walked in silence for a few blocks before Jaden spoke again. "Man, you know if that was you who took that watch, they wouldn't have let you off easy like they did Ethan." Malik let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Of course. Ethan gets to call it a joke. I get called a thief." Jaden shook his head. "Shit's messed up." Malik nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." They reached the corner where their paths split, where Jaden would turn left, and Malik would keep going straight. Jaden clapped him on the back. "See you tomorrow, man." Malik lifted a hand in a half wave, then kept walking. As he neared his apartment building, he spotted his mom's car parked in the lot. His stomach twisted. She had left work for him yesterday, had sat in that office and defended him like she always had to. He pushed open the door to their apartment, kicking off his shoes. His mom stood in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She glanced up when she saw him. "Hey, baby, how was school?" Malik hesitated. He could tell her everything, how Ethan had actually stolen the watch, how Mr. Caldwell had barely apologized, how people still looked at him like the accusation hadn't been cleared. But he didn't. Instead, he shrugged. "It was fine." She gave him a long, knowing look. Then she sighed. "You hungry?" "Yeah." She gestured to the pot. "Go wash up. I made your favorite." For the first time that day, Malik let out a real smile. "Thanks, Ma." And as he walked to the bathroom, washing away the weight of the day, he thought about what he had learned. He thought about how easy it had been for them to turn on him, how quickly people believed a lie when it fit the story they had already decided was true, and how, no matter how unfair it was, he would always have to be twice as careful, twice as good, because people like him didn't get second chances, and they damn sure didn't get to call it a joke.